Welcome to the Royal Road School of Carmelite Prayer. St. Teresa of Avila tells us that the divine path of Carmelite prayer is the royal road to heaven, and that those who travel it will be given a great treasure. A link to the Praying with Teresa of Avila website has been provided below to enable you to easily find today's presentation, Love for Love, the Life and Works of St. Teresa of Jesus, by St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, Edith Stein. Topics 1 through 4. The website provides all the simple tools that you need to develop your own practice of Carmelite or silent prayer, along with complete course materials to start your own school of prayer in your parish or in your community. Love for Love, the Life and Works of St. Teresa of Jesus. One almost feels transported into the time when our Holy Mother Teresa, the foundress of the Reformed Carmel, traveled all over Spain from north to south and from west to east to plant new vineyards of the Lord. One would like to bring into our times also something of the spirit of this great woman who built amazingly during a century of battles and disturbances. May she herself bless this little picture of her life and works, that it may capture at least some of the radiance of her spirit and convey it to the hearts of readers. Then surely will people desire to know her better from the sources, from the rich treasure of her own works. And whoever has learned to draw from these sources will never tire of gaining courage and strength from them again and again. Topic 1. Native Land and Family Home. As a contemporary, spiritual relative and native of the same country as that famous champion of faith, St. Ignatius of Loyola, Teresa's impact unfolded in a century marked by religious strife and a great schism in the Church. When she came into the world, a mere 20 years had passed since the last of the Moors were driven out of Spain, and the whole peninsula united in the Catholic faith. 8 centuries of continual warfare between the cross and the crescent lay behind the Spanish people. During these battles, they blossomed into a heroic people, into a legion of Christ the King. Teresa's most immediate homeland, the ancient kingdom of Castile, was the strong fortress from which, in resolute struggle, the cross was gradually carried to the south. The Castilian knights formed the special troops of the Army of Faith. Teresa, bold warrior for God, came from such a race of heroes. A town built on cliffs, the fortress of Avila, called Avila of the Saints, was her native town. Her parents, Alonso Sanchez de Cepeda, and his second wife, Beatriz de Ahumada, were of old nobility. According to the custom of the times and of her country, she was called by her mother's surname, Teresa de Ahumada. Just as she saw the light of day on the morning of March 28, 1515, the bell of the newly built Carmelite Monastery invited the faithful to a great celebration, to the consecration of its chapel. This was the house that later was to be her home for decades, where the Lord intended to form this vessel of his election. Teresa was the 6th child of her father, the 3rd of her young mother, who had taken charge of the daughter and of 2 sons from her husband's first marriage. 6 younger siblings were later added to these 5 older ones. Alonso Sanchez de Cepeda was a man of deep piety and strong virtue. He carefully watched over the upbringing of his children, sought to keep all harmful influences from them, guided them to everything good, and himself presented them with the best example of a serious Christian life. Delicate Donna Beatrice, mild and humble, ill at an early age and dependent on the help of her stepdaughter Maria for the upbringing of this great band of children, was fervently devout. The love of God and of prayer bloomed spontaneously in the hearts of the children who shared her life. Topic 2. Childhood and Youth. The fiery heart of the little Teresa became attached to her noble parents in ardent love and devotion, and to her siblings in affectionate trust. Her most beloved companions had to be primarily her brothers. Serious Maria, burdened with the duties of the eldest, was not regarded as a comrade, and the baby Juana was many years younger. Rodrigo, 4 years older than she, became her confidant during her childhood. Her mother's pious tales, her first instruction, ignited in the little Spaniard a holy zeal. Despite her liveliness and joy in merry company, she liked to withdraw into a quiet corner of the garden to pray alone. It gave her pleasure to give alms to the poor, and one day the 7-year-old let her favorite brother in on a secret plan that she had thought up. She tells about herself in her biography. We were reading the lives of the saints together when I saw what torments the martyrs endured for God. I discovered that they had earned the joy of seeing God for a low price, and I burned with the same desire to die a similar death. She did not have far to go from the wish to the decision to act, and her brother was also enkindled by her enthusiasm. We decided to travel to the land of the Moors to get our heads cut off. It seemed to me that God had given us enough strength to carry out our plans in spite of our tender years. What was the most difficult for us was parting from our parents, but the thought of eternal joy won over the pain of separation. Forever. Oh, Rodrigo, think of it. The martyrs gaze upon God forever. We must become martyrs. The very next morning they secretly set out on their way, but they did not get far. They slipped through the town gate happily, but soon afterwards they met an uncle who took the little fugitives back to their parents. They had already been missed and were greeted with reproach. I left, Teresa replied, because I want to see God, and because one must die in order to see him. She was very hurt that her lovely plan had fallen apart. Her zeal did not abate. She built hermitages with Rodrigo in the garden. She preferred to play monastery life with her friends, and she continued her lengthy devotions. The early death of her mother cut deeply into Teresa's youth. She was then 13 years old. She herself says about it, I threw myself down in despair before an image of the Mother of God. With many tears I implored the Holy Virgin to become my mother now. Uttered with the simplicity of a child, this prayer was heard. From that hour on, I never prayed to the Virgin in vain. The young person certainly surmised that she needed special protection. Having lost her mother just when she especially needed her, Teresa had blossomed into a young beauty. Black curls framed her white forehead. Luminous dark eyes revealed the passion of her soul. Her movements and her posture had natural grace and dignity. The liveliness of her spirit, her charming amiability, gave her attractiveness in her social life that almost no one could resist. The dangers already inherent in these natural gifts were increased by the inclination that she had already awakened in the young girl during her mother's life. Donna Beatrice, who was constantly housebound by her suffering, liked to find a little distraction in romances of chivalry and was weak enough to allow her children to read them too, even though this was not the father's intent. After her death, Teresa gave in to her passion without restraint and devoured one book after the other, busying herself with them day and night. Those novels are forgotten today, but we know their character from the magnificent satire Cervantes' Don Quixote, which exposed for all time such writings and their impact. The Knight of the Woeful Countenance, who mistook windmills for giants and a peasant girl for a princess, is the victim of such caricatures of real life. Teresa's active imagination was also enchanted by such entrancing portrayals of the deeds of heroic knights. The gentle attraction of the pious legends of her childhood paled against these colorful exploits. With bitter regret, she herself later looked back on these youthful mistakes. Oh, how I suffer now when I recall how I forgot the longings of my childhood. My God, since you seem to have decided to rescue me, let it be your glorious will to do so. Why did this soul, which you have selected for your habitation and showered with grace, become spotted like this? I feel great pain remembering it, for I know very well that I alone was guilty. You, O Lord, have left nothing untried to open my eyes ever since my youngest days. It's not surprising that the young girl began to compare herself with the heroines of her beloved novels. There came a time when I understood the natural gifts that heaven had bestowed on me. Soon I acquired a taste for beautiful clothes. I wanted to appear well dressed. I took many pains with my hands and my hair. I resorted to every lovely scent and beauty aid that I could lay my hands on. Above all, I loved the meticulous cleanliness. I really did not have any ulterior motives at all in my heart. For all the world, I did not want anyone to get an idea of offending God. The young beauty did not lack admirers. However, her strict father would not permit her to associate with the young strangers, but cousins of the same age were allowed in the house. They liked me, and we spent time together. I let them talk as they would. I enlivened their conversation, and to please them, I took pleasure in their dreams of the future, in their childish misdeeds, and other useless things. However, the worst was that I learned about feelings and attitudes that were later to be unfortunate for me. The influence of one young relative was particularly unhealthy. She was so frivolous that my mother, as if guessing the bad results, tried everything to keep her away from me, but it was in vain. She always returned under this or that pretext. Soon we were close confidants. We talked together constantly. She gave me as much pleasure as I wanted, allowed me to share in hers, and confided her secrets and conceits to me. I couldn't get enough of listening to her. I believe I was a little over 14 years old when our unhealthy friendship started. I believe that in this first period of my life, I did not commit even one mortal sin. What saved me was the fear of God, and I must say, the even greater fear of staining my honor. For my honor was everything to me, and nothing in the world, no earthly good, could have shaken my decision to keep it pure. Nevertheless, the effect was deep enough. This friendship changed me so much that soon there was nothing left of my good nature. My relative and one of her equally frivolous girlfriends seemed to have imprinted the frivolity of their characters on me. Her father and older sister, who tended the younger siblings with motherly concern, saw the transformation with serious alarm and made a definite decision. When Maria left her family home to go to the house of a pious nobleman as his wife, Don Alonso sent his darling to an Augustinian monastery to be educated. Suddenly and without saying goodbye, she vanished from the merry circle of which she had been the center. Topic 3. The Monastery Pupil. The Monastery of Our Lady of Grace was highly regarded in Avila. The first families of the city entrusted it with their daughters. Teresa felt as if she were in prison during the first days behind the monastery walls, But soon the solitude aroused strong repentance. For the past months, she was tormented by pangs of conscience. But this painful state of affairs did not last long. Again, she found her peace of mind and also quickly adjusted to boarding school life. With grateful love, she attached herself to the boarding school mistress, Maria Briciero, a devout nun and an outstanding educator. Among the nuns, I found one who was especially designated to supervise the pupils. Her bed was in our dormitory. It was she whom God designated to open my eyes. Her conversations seemed beneficial to me. She spoke so beautifully of God. I loved to listen to her. She told me how upon reading the words of the gospel, many are called but few are chosen. She made the decision to leave the world. She also reflected for me the joy that God reserves for those who leave everything for the love of Him. While listening to her, I forgot the recent past. I felt the thought, the longing for eternal things awaken in me. My great aversion to monastic life more and more disappeared. I only stayed in this monastery for 1.5 years. Though I had made great progress in goodness there, I asked the nuns for their prayers that God would show me a way of life in which I could best serve Him. In my heart, I was afraid that it could be a call to a monastery, just as I was afraid of marriage. Toward the end of my stay in the monastery, however, my inclinations turned more and more to religious life. Soon I believed that I was nevertheless not up to some of the practices of this monastery. I could not decide on this order. Moreover, I had a dear friend in a monastery of another convent. Uppermost in my mind was choosing a house where I could be with her. I was thinking less of the salvation of my soul than of the inclination of my nature. These good thoughts of becoming a nun arose now and then, but then left without my making a definitive decision. Topic 4. Vocational decision. Still unclear about her future life's path, Teresa returned to her father's house. A serious illness occasioned her return. During her convalescence, she was sent to the farm of her sister Maria, who surrounded her with tender love and would have preferred to keep her permanently. But her father was unwilling to be deprived of her company any longer. He picked her up himself, but left her en route with his brother Pedro Sanchez de Cepeda in Hortzagozia for a few weeks, since he himself had to finish some pressing business. Teresa's stay with her uncle was to be of decisive importance for her life. His life was devoted entirely to prayer and to being occupied with spiritual books. He asked Teresa to read to him. Actually, she writes, this bored me a little. However, in order to give other pleasure, I gave the impression that I did so gladly anyhow, because I was overly compliant in order to give others pleasure. This time it was not to her detriment. Soon she was very much taken by the books her uncle gave her, the letters of St. Jerome, St. Gregory's Morals, and the writing of St. Augustine captivated her active spirit and reawakened in her the pious enthusiasm of her childhood. The reading was often interrupted, and the pious old man and the young reader discussed the questions of eternal life in connection with it. Teresa's resolve ripened in this environment. She took a glance at her past life. What would have become of her if the Lord had called her from her life during the time of vanity and infidelity? She does not want to expose herself to this danger again. From then on, eternal salvation is to be her goal, and in order not to lose sight of it again, she will heroically conquer her aversion to religious life. her love of freedom, and her tender attachment to her father and siblings. After the interior battle came a difficult outer one. In spite of all his piety, Don Alonso does not want to be separated from his favorite daughter. All her pleas and the advocacy of her uncle and siblings are in vain. But Teresa is no less decisive than her father. Since she cannot hope for his consent, she secretly leaves home. As in her earlier childish adventure, one of her brothers accompanies her. It's not Rodrigo, for he no longer lives at home. Having taken a post in the Spanish colonies in America, Antonio, who is 2 years younger than Teresa, takes his place. She herself says, "While I was settling on my leaving, I persuaded one of my brothers to leave the world by pointing out its frivolities to him. We agreed to set out early in the morning, and that my brother himself would take me to the monastery. But when I stepped over the threshold of my family home, such fear gripped me that I believed I could hardly be more afraid at the hour of my death. It was as if my bones were being separated from one another. The love for God was not strong enough in me to triumph over the love for my relatives. My natural feelings arose with such force that in spite of all my deliberations, without God's support, I would not have taken one more step. But God gave me courage in spite of myself, and I set out. Antonio took his sister to the door of the Carmelite monastery. Then he himself went to the Dominican monastery of St. Thomas and asked for admission. This was on All Souls' Day of the year 1535. Amen.